Some employment contracts contain provisions that restrict an employee's ability to compete with the employer after the employee leaves the job. In Graham v. Cirocco, the Kansas Court of Appeals considered the enforceability of a covenant not to compete signed by a doctor in an in-demand, medically necessary specialty. In 1987, Dr. Bruce Graham opened a colorectal surgery practice in Kansas City, Kansas. By 1994, Graham's practice had become so successful that he hired a new surgeon, Dr. William Cirocco, to help manage his patient load. The parties signed an employment agreement containing a covenant not to compete that imposed two important restrictions on Cirocco. The first restriction prohibited Cirocco from soliciting any of Graham's patients or referral sources from whom he had come in contact during his employment. The second restriction prohibited Cirocco from opening an office within 25 miles of 12 area hospitals. Both restrictions applied for a period of 2 years after Cirocco left Graham's practice. Cirocco resigned from Graham's practice in 2000, immediately opened his own colorectal surgery practice next door to Graham, and actively solicited Graham's patients. At the time, there were only 6 colorectal surgeons in the Kansas City metropolitan area, and 4 of them were located on the Missouri side of the border. This meant that Graham and Cirocco were the only colorectal surgeons in northeastern Kansas. After Cirocco left, Graham's practice was so busy that Graham was on call 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and some patients had to wait as long as 4 weeks for an appointment. Graham sued in state trial court to enforce the covenant not to compete, asking the court to enjoin Cirocco from practicing from the office next door and from soliciting Graham's patients. Cirocco argued that the covenant was unenforceable because it violated public policy. Specifically, Cirocco argued that the covenant suppressed ordinary competition and that it would deprive northeastern Kansas of much-needed colorectal surgeons. At trial, Cirocco presented evidence that enforcement of the covenant would leave northeastern Kansas with Graham as the only colorectal surgeon for 700,000 potential patients. Cirocco also presented evidence that colorectal surgeries performed by general surgeons resulted in a higher death rate than those performed by colorectal surgeons. Despite this evidence, the trial court concluded that the covenant was enforceable and enjoined Cirocco's practice for 2 years. Cirocco appealed to the Kansas Court of Appeals.